All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 125. It's Tuesday night. We're here to talk with you, as we always are. There's so much going on in college football, and hearing your voices and discussing the issues of the week is something we like to do with you. So if you'd like to join us, just go ahead and hit that request button on the Twitter app. I'll let you up, and we can talk about what's going on in college football. So I'm going to be joined by my regular co-hosts tonight, JD Moore and Sirius. But again, we'd like to have you part of that conversation. There's a lot of interesting things going on. Actually, the news story that caught my attention today, and there's a lot kind of going on. But Brett McMurphy, who's always got a good idea of what's going on in college football, has reported that Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff has visited Southern Methodist University Wednesday, and right now the leading contenders for Pac-12 expansion are apparently San Diego State and SMU. Those make some sense. They certainly fill in a couple of glaring holes that keep the Pac-12 competitive, of course, after they were losing USC and UCLA to the Big Ten. I think San Diego State's probably the less surprising of the two. It's been expected that they would be the go-to team to replace that important Southern California market, kind of bring it back into the Pac-12 fold. Obviously, not necessarily to the extent as UCLA and USC, but it is definitely a large market. San Diego is a metro population of like 4 million, and it will bring in the Los Angeles market again. And this idea of bringing in Southern Methodist certainly will bring in the Metroplex, which is an extremely valuable market. My joke is they should just have every conference at the Metroplex involving college football, because so many of them end up there with the Big 12, Conference USA, the Cotton Bowl. Obviously, there's just so much that goes on there. But it looks like my co-hosts are finally here. JD, how are you doing tonight?
It has been more than 24 hours at this point of John Ruiz refusing to correct the math on Miami spending more than $25 million on coaching changes just to go 5-7 with a home loss to MTSU in this last year. Was really hoping, after all the shouting that he did on Twitter, that he'd eventually come up with new numbers. But alas, we must still wait.
Yeah, that was a surprise. Maybe he'll jump in on here. And if he does, he'd be welcome. But that was that. Well, I remember waking up and seeing like, oh, who did we decide to have a conversation with this morning on Twitter? And it was John Ruiz, Life Wallet CEO, attorney, certainly a mega booster for the Canes. And we've got nothing against the Canes. I'd love to see them fun again and successful again, because the U is entertaining, if anything else. And speaking of the Canes, they've made a shift. One of the big stories that was popular in our CFB this week was that Tulane's defensive coordinator, Lance Guidry, is expected to become the next defensive coordinator at Miami. That was the news today by Pete Thamel, who's usually a reliable source on that. So, of course, he was only there for he was barely there. So that was kind of one of those moments where at least it wasn't the head coach, but someone got poached almost immediately by a deeper pocketed program. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, he was named as defensive coordinator at Tulane 18 days ago, and now it appears that he's going to be over in Miami. So we'll see how that goes over there. But again, if you want to join the conversation, we always enjoy hearing from you. It's college football. We enjoy it. It's something fun. Just hit request. We'd love to have your thoughts on what's going on. JD, there's other stuff that's been going on too. By the way, I would love to hear you. I kind of, when we sort of launched in, started talking about these Pac-12 rumors that are going on expansion. San Diego State being in the lead is one of those programs that we expected, but Southern Methodist, it's been mentioned before, but it seems like there's more than just smoke going on with the commissioner heading over there. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it's necessarily a surprise to hear that SMU is being floated around for Pac-12 rumors. There's been previous rumors about that before, and we've also seen, this is not the first time that the Pac-12 has tried to get into Texas. It's been shown for more than a dozen years at this point that the Pac 12 wants some form, if they go to further expansion, to get into the Lone Star State. We saw this way back when they were the first ones to try to get Texas to get out of the Big 12, and they tried to do the package deal that included them and Texas Tech, trying to pull them, and then that deal kind of fell apart. Then they started new rumors again with going after Texas Tech when Texas announced that they were going to the SEC. Now we're seeing SMU being courted after TCU had once been courted, after all these different Texas schools, have been floated as rumors at one point or another to the Pac-12. I don't think it's surprising that SMU is now the next team that the Pac-12 is talking about, because they seem to be the most likely to jump at this next point. The Big 12 now has this new contract. They're positioned to be the third highest Power 5, or rather the third highest paid conference. With their new TV rights that have been negotiated, they have a lot of stability in this new group of 4 teams that they have coming on board, with UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, kind of stabilizing that conference for a bit. So I don't think the Pac-12 is necessarily in a point of power to try to poach one of those schools out. So you have to start looking at, who would be willing to jump at this point, and you got to start looking at some of those G5 schools. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense for San Diego State to fill in that void, but I think SMU, that gets you into the DFW market for your recruits. That gets you the opportunity to get in front of Texas TVs, Texas eyeballs. You have a school that, although it's a little bit religiously affiliated, you got to remember Methodist is in the name. They still do have a very large endowment, very good academics for what the Pac-12 wants to go out and court respectfully. They're not necessarily looking for like a Boise State level of academics, which is very unfortunate given the geography of the Pac-12. You're not going to be looking for a UNLV. You're not going to be looking for a Fresno State.
Yeah, and to be fair, they don't really add as significant a market. You just can't compare Boise. I don't care how fast Boise is growing. They don't have the TV market that the Metroplex does or San Diego has. Those two are enormous markets. And, of course, San Diego, as I mentioned, drags in at least the Southern California market again. So I think I know Fresno State fans are disappointed that the Pac-12 doesn't really seems to want them, and Boise State fans, but the problem is those markets just are. Well, first of all, Fresno State, all respect to them, they were basically, and I get it, they do fill a void because USC and UCLA certainly had control of the Central Valley in a lot of ways, especially the southern half of the Central Valley, which is Fresno, Bakersfield, and all the little towns in between. But yeah, they unfortunately, while they would love to be members of the Pac-12, they don't bring in the heft. And it's so funny now that I'm thinking about it. Losing USC and UCLA, bringing in SDSU, San Diego State, state school, fine university, big university in the Cal State system. And then, I was just thinking, Southern Methodist, you were talking about, obviously they're a good school, private school. I just realized from what I've read, the attitude of the SMU fan might be a good replacement for the USC fan. Am I right there? I mean, it seems like, because, I went to USC. I've said that a bajillion times. The reputation of USC, especially when I went there, was a bunch of rich kids, who couldn't get necessarily into the school of their choice. And, the really insult was USC was University of Second Choices. But and that's changed over the last couple of decades. But at the same time, they were the annoying kind of, sometimes fratty kind of, obnoxious fans. And from what I've heard, SMU might be a good filler for that.
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily off the cuff there. I think, SMU fans would get, or at least the student body would get along very, very well with some of the USC student body. But I think overall, again, when you're looking at who is available to fill in this void and get the Pac-12 up to 12 members again, looking at what they truly value with academics and profile of the student bodies, the alumni connections and the president connections, SMU seems to make a lot of sense for who is available as the last available partner. I don't think it's necessarily too big a surprise, but man, could you imagine going back 10 years ago and going, hey, you know what? That Iron Skillet game, that's a Power 5 matchup. Oh, wow, both of them made it to the Big 12? Not quite.
Hey, and we have a couple of guests up here right now. Let's see here. I see. Well, Sirius, by the way, he's now up here. He's able to talk. But I wanted to also welcome Coach Oates. What's going on? What did you want to talk about?
What are your thoughts? I'm a big Iowa Hawkeye fan, and I'm trying. I'm typically one of the more positive fans, and I'm obviously not going to quit rooting. But I'm wondering, are we like the laughing stock of college football after this Brian Ferentz news yesterday?
I mean, it's always going to be one thing of, you have hired your son as your offensive coordinator. That's always one thing. And I don't think nobody ever really cares if your son is doing excellently at the job, right? When you see something like a Charlie Weiss Jr. Performing really, really well as an offensive coordinator, you don't think, oh, this is a nepotism hire. And surely, like, he only got the name because, or he only got the job because of his name. You ended up seeing a really good result. You're not seeing that with Brian Ferentz. And for them to publicly come out and go, hey, you know what? We're putting essentially a PIP plan in. And the entire PIP is going to be, we're going to only dock him 50 grand, which is hardly anything in his actual annual salary. And then also say, we really want 25 points a game. Does it have to come from the offense? We want 25 points a game. Given, we had tweeted about it earlier of like this horrible fan fiction that I think would be absolutely hilarious of, enter a scene of Iowa, Nebraska, last game of the season. Iowa has scored 298 points on the year, 7-4. So they've already got the 7 wins to keep Brian's job safe. But then, Nebraska has to snap the ball on their own 5-yard line. And Kirk Ferentz smiles because his end game has come. A safety gets his son a 2-year contract. That's something that would be exceptionally peak Iowa. And
Yeah,
at this point, I mean, I don't know if you as an Iowa fan are excited about I want my team to win or I want my team to do just badly enough that Brian Ferentz is contractually forced out of my program.
I mean, you always got to cheer for him, but it's just kind of embarrassing. It's not like they really even gave him that tough of parameters to meet. It's like we've won 7 games plus the last 8 years or so. If you take out that COVID year, so it's not like they're making him do much. So, I don't know, just frustrating times.
Yeah, I don't know how to break this to you, but I wouldn't say that the news this week made Iowa the laughing stock because we were all already laughing last year and the year before about the issues that Brian Ferentz's offense was having. This is just like the next joke in the set, and we're just kind of like waiting to see how this is going to go because we're like halfway through the Netflix special at this point. So,
Yeah,
I mean, like, I'm hoping for Iowa's kicker to have to kick like multiple 60-yarders a game, just because they're trying to get to that 25 points per game because they've got a great defense and special teams, but they only had 6 touchdowns last year, and that's just not going to be enough to get the work done. So they're going to have to find some more points somewhere else on the field, and technically those are going to count. So yeah, he got his $50,000 deduction, but then if he hits 25 points per game, then and the 7 wins, he gets like $150,000 back. So it's quite the situation. I guess this is what happens when your dad's the God Emperor for life of Iowa.
and that's because I don't. It's not like I want to move on from Kirk Ferentz, and like I don't think that would be the right move. But at some point, it's kind of a joke when you keep doing this for your son. But anyways, we can move on. I doubt all these people want to listen about Iowa, but that was my only comments.
Well, hey, before we move on to a different topic, though, I do want to ask one question in sincerity.
Sure.
Is this a year that we see Phil Parker go, hey, you know what? So proud of you boys. Recover those fumbles, get those interceptions, run out of bounds at the 10-yard line. Let's see what Brian can do here.
I don't no, I don't think so. But I would be kind of frustrated to find him as well. But if anything, it's making him look even better in all this. But he's got to be pretty pissed off, just knowing what could be.
I have to just say I was kind of reviewing the posts that were on this topic on our CFB, and what I love the top comment when it was first. Well, actually, before they even gave the details about what they were going to do for Brian Ferentz, but when it was announced that Kirk Ferentz was going to anticipate no changes to his coaching staff, the Minnesota user, but I don't think he meant this as a rivalry thing. It was user humble like Starscream used the classic Simpsons joke. Good old Rock. Nothing beats that from that episode where Lisa knows exactly what Bart's going to pick in rock, paper, scissors. It's going to be rock. And then it's like you hear it, Bart's brain, good old rock. Nothing beats that. And that's that's exactly what it feels like with Kirk. It's like he's gonna keep trying. He's gonna keep running the same thing, and eventually he hopes it's gonna work. But yeah, man, thank you, Coach Oates. It was great hearing from you.
Thank you.
Hey, Doc Holliday, I see you're back. We'd love to hear from you.
What's going on, man?
How are you?
I'm good. We not freezing no more here, so that's a good thing. I'm in Dallas, so we're not freezing. We got rain now, but it's our typical February Texas weather. But with Iowa, I gotta say this about Iowa, man. You got a dude that's been there for over 25 years, man. I say it like this. I'm gonna say it like this. If he goes 7-4 again, or whatever type of record he has, that's not winning the Big Ten Eastern Division, he got to go. He has to go. You have to unceremoniously dethrone him from the head coaching job if he can't get it. You know what I'm saying? If he can't get it done. So I think it's time. I think on a real, from what I'm listening to, it's time for some new blood to come into Iowa. Don't get me wrong, he had great success with Kirk Ferentz, and and to talk about the contract stipulation with Brian Ferentz, I laughed at that. I laughed go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say, well, listen, when you're talking about, ousting a guy who has built the modern football program at Iowa, at least in what I've heard from Iowa circles, it is universally Kirk Ferentz is loved in the fact that he's built a consistent bowl program every, maybe 5 to 6 years. He's competing for a New Year's Six, if not a Big Ten title. But the biggest complaint solely goes to Brian Ferentz more than anything else. Yes, there's a couple of arguments about Chris Doyle. There's a couple of arguments about culture, but everybody loves the fact that he's built a consistent winner in Iowa City. And I don't think anybody's necessarily calling for his ouster. But what I do see is people just absolutely livid at this idea that, not only is his son the offensive coordinator, the son isn't doing well, but it's this magic thinking of Gary Barta is the only one who gets to decide whether Brian Ferentz gets to keep his job or not. So I don't think anybody's necessarily calling for Kirk Ferentz to resign or for him to be fired. And it's also insanely prohibitive. He's got something like a $47 million buyout.
Yeah, it was 48. It was 48 million last season. So I think it reduces, by his salary each. Because the reason 48 is 29. So that's still a lot of money. Not crazy, burn everything and fire. Oh, I've got some audio issues, I've been told, so I'm gonna correct.
But yeah, needless to say, though, I think there's in no best interest for anybody wanting Kirk Ferentz to be out of the program, to stop being the leader of the Iowa Hawkeyes. But I think at this point, if Brian Ferentz somehow half delivers on what he needs to do and gets any form of an extension, I imagine the pitchforks start coming out for Brian at his house as opposed to Kirk himself. But then again, we did see an example this last year of TCU, the man who literally has a statue on campus, had built the entire program at TCU. He parted ways. Yeah, he parted ways with TCU, and the Horned Frogs immediately went to the national championship game. Not saying it's always replicable, but the example is there.
But yeah,
watch they steal PJ Fleck and that happens. That would be.
And if you don't,
oh my goodness,
don't have coaches like that.
Doc, what else are you thinking about, man?
Let's see. What we got? Well, on my end, I deal with HBCU football. All of everybody in the SWAT. Everybody's schedules came out last week. This past weekend. I'm gonna say I give a grade to a couple of schools. I'm gonna give an A+ to Prairie View for their schedule. They have the first couple of games that they have are some very competitive but tough games. Um, the one game that people are talking about that say they might not should have had scheduled that would be SMU. But I think the way that Prairie View and Bubba McDowell, people forget that he's the head coach over at Prairie View. You know, he played in the NFL with the Houston Oilers back in the day, former University of Miami great. Uh, the schedule that he came out with playing SMU and Abilene Christian, um, he got Houston Christian on the schedule. Uh, he has no incarnate word, so that's good. So he don't have to worry about that. So I give him an A plus for the schedule that he made up right there. I also would give I probably give an A minus to my alma mater, Jackson State. We start off the season um, in the MEAC SWAC Challenge with South Carolina State. That's in Atlanta. Second game of the season, we have the Orange Blossom Classic, and that's against Florida A&M, which is, you know, we're making that a big rivalry game with FAMU. Our third game of the season, which is we consider, even though it's our conference rival, we consider this game out of conference game. That doesn't have any effect on our in our conference standings, which would be Southern. So we'll play Southern down in Baton Rouge. That is the Pete Richardson Classic. And then the fourth game would be Texas State. And that's going to be in San Marcos. Uh, and with Texas State, you know, G.J. Kinney became the head coach. You know, he was the head coach at Incarnate Word last season. He had Lindsey Scott as a QB for UIW, who was the Walter Payton Award winner, obliterated a lot of passing records, touchdown records to be exact. Last season with that team, he's moved on. So Kenny is at Texas State, and majority of his staff from UIW followed him up to San Marcos. So I think that would be it would be a tough non-conference game for us. Make for good offensive football. I like I tell people, I like the the hiring of TC Taylor as our head coach. Now it's crazy because I say this, and I can say I could be biased because TC is my. We came in the same freshman class at Jackson in 1997. You talk about a guy that pretty much eat, sleep, breathe, you know, football, black college football. He's taking, you know, I feel like he's gonna try to take Jackson State to new heights, and especially with the signing class that we had gotten this past last week, which made us number one in FCS as far as recruiting. A couple of 4 stars, a lot of 3 stars, and a couple of 2 stars from JUCO players, and the kids that were still on the team from last season, who Coach Prime had recruited before he left to go to Colorado. I'm wanting to see how he's going to do as far as with the games that we're going to play. Third on my list, I would go with. Ooh, I haven't seen the rest of. I mean, I've seen the rest of it, but I would go with Texas Southern. Texas Southern has arguably one of the more dynamic quarterbacks now that's not named Shador Sanders and Andrew Body. You're talking about a dual threat QB that could actually, if he was to be let loose, he could pass for 3,000 and run for 1,000 yards. Coach McKinney has gave him more weapons to go with at his disposal. So I'm looking to see what Texas Southern does. So I give them a B. I give them a B plus on their schedule. And my last pick as far as schedule wise would be, I would say FAMU. I give them B minus. You're going to play. You got University of West Florida who is a D2 national power. You got to remember they were probably like a touchdown or so away from going to the national championship game. They lost in the semifinals to Ferris State, who was the eventual national champion this past season. Um, they also have a game against University of South Florida and Tampa, which is going to test their mettle. The best thing about Florida A&M is they don't have the situation that they had last season with the certification of the players that they were dealing with. You had like over 25 players that was ineligible, and in parts of the season. They Willie Simmons. Um, he returns another start. He returns his quarterback in Jeremy Musa, who's a Vanderbilt transfer. He basically was the better. He was the best quarterback, not named Shador Sanders, in the SWAC. So it's a good thing that they have as far as the schedule goes. The only knock about the um, in the SWAC would be Bethune-Cookman because they just hired a head coach in Raymond Woody. Don't know what his team will be. They have a lot of issues going down there in Daytona at Bethune-Cookman. Hopefully they'll get all that rectified before the season starts. And look, I'm just ready for some HBCU football. I'm gonna start talking about some MEAC schedules coming up in the next couple of weeks, and then I'm going to go into the D2 ranks in the CIAA and the SIAC. So in the SIAC, I'm going to talk about Benedict College. They were pretty much undefeated until they played their second round game against Wingate, which was a tough loss for them. But Chennis Berry comes in. He returns a lot of his starters back. I think he returns his quarterback, Eric Phoenix, back also. I have to make sure and check that out, see if that's the case. But there's a lot of football that's going on. And I also did an interview with the AD for Chicago State, Dr. Monique Carroll. It was an interesting interview on my podcast. They're exploring the idea of adding football to their program. So y'all go ahead and check that out on HBCU Overdrive. You can
Yeah, what do
check it
you?
out on
I want to
YouTube.
ask you about that. The
Go
Chicago
ahead, go ahead.
State thing. I'm
Yeah,
so I'm so curious if that's going to work out because they brought it up before, and that's a program that it's tough. I know the school has struggled a lot. It's public school, so it's got that anchor, so to speak, in keeping it around. But I remember, gosh, it was like 5 6 years ago they talked about it, and that was when their attendance was something like 2,000. It had just plummeted over the years. But
right. But I think they went back up to probably like I think that she said they're almost close to 3,000 students there. And of
yeah.
course, yes, yes, they are a public institution, state institution that's on the south side of Chicago. Um, we talked about that. They already formed an exploratory committee where you got a couple of not Hall of Famers, but you got a couple of Super Bowl uh, players that's on that committee. One of them would be Otis Wilson, of course, from the '85 Bears. Everybody know that. Also, you have Howard Griffin, two-time Super Bowl champion. That's on the committee, and they got a lot of people that's within the community that's on the committee. Also, they have the football coach, the head football coach from Simeon High School, same school that produced Derrick Rose. They are really, and I think, and I'm hoping that the president of the school says yes, because now if you get that, if the president says yes, now you can start you can start preparing to hire coaches, see where you'll play, and getting the kids to come over there. So what they're targeted is fall of 2025 to start playing football if it is approved by the school president. So that's a thing that that's exciting to have. Um, And if it, like I said, if it happens, look, it'll be the only, it'll be the only Division I team school inside the city of Chicago
Right.
that have a
Northwestern,
football
though, I
team.
mean, that's like
Right.
that. Yeah. But it'll be tough, though. I mean, and the funny thing is, there's actually good football in the Chicagoland area because D3's
Right.
got North Central, and they have proved to be just a hell of a powerhouse in that they won a championship a few years ago. But
And you have
yeah,
University
no,
of Chicago
there's a
within a
lot to,
room.
to chew on there. I mean, Bethune-Cookman, at least Raymond Woody, the expectations aren't going to be really high in a good way. I mean, because after the whole Ed Reed debacle, it's just like, you know what? At this point, whatever he can do, he's an alumnus. That helps. I know his son is playing. His son, actually, I looked it up. His son, because I mean, he's Raymond Woody Jr. and Raymond Woody III. He's at Cal now. He was at Florida
Yeah.
State for a hot minute, but that's because his dad was there and he went to high school at Florida State High School. But
Yeah. You're talking about Raymond. You're talking about Coach Woody. He's been with Willie Taggart pretty much Willie Taggart's whole coaching career, like head coaching carear.
yeah, because he's coming
He
from
start
FAU because of that. He's like associate. He was AHC over there.
Yeah, he was the associate head coach at FAU. So he was with him at Western Kentucky, where he had success over there. He goes to Florida State, which I think they did him dirty. They never did give him a chance to get his kids in there to get it going. Then he lands the job over at Oregon, um, which was a decent job. Which he did a decent job, but not up to Oregon standards. And then he goes to FAU, where he almost had Shedeur Sanders until Coach Prime went, before he was named the head coach at Jackson State. So, so he's from what I'm hearing, Coach Woody is a hell of a recruiter. That's what you're gonna need right there. You're gonna need the recruiting.
Yeah, and someone who's a believer and is an alum really helps. I think
Right.
that'll definitely give him staying power, and he's had the experience, and as you said, all those programs with Willie Taggart, and I'm sure he's learned things that he might do differently, and now he's got that opportunity to put his stamp on that program, and they'll just appreciate someone who wants to be there and appreciates the school and understands what's going on there. But yeah, Doc, it's great talking to you, man. Thanks for joining
yeah.
us.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely. Hey guys, I just wanted to sort of check in with y'all. So again, this is our CFB Talk 125. We always like hearing from you guys. It's Tuesday night. If you'd like to join the conversation, anything you want to talk about in college football, just go ahead and hit request. We also like to kind of talk about what's going on in the news this week. We've talked a little bit early on about the Pac-12 looking like it's focusing in more on San Diego State and SMU, especially with that Brent McMurphy tweet talking about the commissioner, George Kliavkoff, in the Metroplex visiting SMU this week. But also there's, we talked about the fact that Tulane's DC, Lance Guidry was there for like 18 days, has been poached by Miami to go down there and see what he can do with the Canes. But there's been a couple other fun stories there. We talked a little bit, obviously, about the Brian Ferentz story and his head coach. But the other kind of ongoing thing is the saga of whether or not Oklahoma and Texas will be leaving the Big 12 a year early to join the SEC, and what's going on in that story. I know, JD, you wanted to add some conversation on that. What are you thinking about this move? And again, if you'd like to join us out there, please hit request.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about all these moves that have happened in conference realignment, it still is incredibly ironic to me that the one domino that fell that started all of this was Oklahoma and Texas, and it still seems to be that will be the last one that actually goes into effect. This next year, we've got all these new teams in the Big 12 that are coming in, and we get some hilarious results, like Texas having to go to Houston. You've got Oklahoma having to play Cincinnati and BYU in this upcoming season. But now we've had all these reports that have come out that have essentially said that Texas and Oklahoma are ready to pony up some money, actually leave the SEC, but it's the television partners that are actually holding it up because they want to keep the inventory for 2024. So it seems like ESPN and Fox are actually the ones who can't come to an agreement with these teams and with the Big 12 to make sure that they can actually move over into the SEC quicker. The idea that we're going to have, another year available for one last bedlam, for one last, opportunity for all these schools to play against Texas and Oklahoma one more time, I think just absolutely infuriates everybody at Oklahoma and Texas. I thought it was kind of a bygone belief of everybody thinking, oh yeah, there's no way they're going to have to wait until 2025 to actually go out and move into the SEC. But we're now looking at a very realistic timeline where in 2024, we've got USC and UCLA moving into the Big Ten, and that move actually will happen before Texas and Oklahoma. And that to me is absolutely ironic in the way that we're seeing all these moves happening in the Big 12 realignment.
Yeah, I agree. And I just the fact that the television is one of these hangups and that ESPN and Fox are just not satisfied with the deal, that really does kind of hammer home who's pulling the strings on all of this. Sirius, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Kind of reminds me of some of the early NIL legislation where some states tried to, force the issue, and the NCAA wound up, being forced to let the floodgates open. And then it actually happened before the legislation went into effect. So I think that's kind of what came to my mind in terms of, the domino falling over, but not actually landing until several other dominoes had already hit the ground, with Texas and OU going to the SEC. And yeah, it just seems really weird, some of the holdups that we're seeing on why they couldn't get this deal worked out, considering the players involved. So it'll be interesting to see if we really are locked into that, or if maybe there's a last second shift in priorities and some people can figure out how to make it work. But it is kind of wild to see that we're going to have multiple teams changing conferences before the two that kicked it off finally make it into their new one. And especially since I know that some of the SEC teams have already got the stuff in place that, they're ready to make minor changes in order to have everything updated for the two new members. And those have been in place for over a year now. So it's an interesting situation, the logistics of actually getting them from one conference to another, especially considering the success and the budgets of those two athletic departments.
Yeah, and gosh, with Oklahoma, I just find their schedule really interesting this year because obviously they're playing at Tulsa, although it's a non-conference game. They're playing at Cincy as a conference game, and then they're playing at BYU. And I didn't realize that not only is this, and I know it's probably been mentioned elsewhere, but I've only become to the realization that OU and BYU have played twice, and BYU has won both times. And this is going to be the first time they've never played at each other's home. One was the Copper Bowl, and one was a neutral site game in Arlington, Texas. So this is going to be the first, home game for either program, and BYU's got the 2-0 lead on that. So I'm looking forward to that when it's a later season game, but that'll be interesting. It's always, for any Sooners fans who get that opportunity, it's worth the trip because I've been to Provo for a football game. It's a beautiful place, and Utah's wonderful. It's really close to Salt Lake City and Park City, and it's a kind of a neat little trifecta of places to visit, Utah or BYU. It's wonderful location, wonderful place to see football if you get that chance. But as we kind of pursue here again, pursue. I don't know why I said that, but as we kind of go after some of these topics in college football, if you'd like to join us, give your thoughts on what's going on, hit request. We'd love to hear from you, as we always do on Tuesday nights. One of the other stories that I kind of did enjoy hearing was this, NIL is always kind of floating around in the background now, but I always admire the folks who kind of do positive things with this money they're pulling in. And Nebraska signee Malachi Coleman is putting 100% of his NIL money to kids in foster care. And the reason is, well before he emerged as a four-star Nebraska signee, he was a person in the foster care system. He'd been homeless. He'd been abused, as he said. And that's 100% of why his NIL money is going to foster care, because he wants foster kids to know they have hope. Sirius, I know you wanted to to comment on this.
Yeah, we've been unapologetically pro athlete, pro player for years now. And when NIL was legalized, that was something that we were pretty unabashed about that. We're supporting the players and what they're doing. We think that a lot of these are fantastic young men and women, and they're going to do great things now that they have the opportunity to actually raise some funds without getting in trouble. Even just look back at what happened recently in Buffalo with DeMar Hamlin, and it was publicized that as soon as he was no longer an athlete, one of the first things he did was he set up a charity to get Christmas toys for children. So we knew that the potential was there, but it is amazing to see all of the creative and heartwarming ways that so many of these athletes are giving back to their communities, whether it's where they grew up or where they're playing football or underserved communities. So what he's doing with this is truly astounding, and he's to receive absolutely every bit of accolades and applause for this because, as you said, he came from a very, very rough upbringing, having to go through the foster care system and having to go through so many struggles of his own. And now that he has the chance to earn money from NIL deals, he's decided that he doesn't actually want it. He's wanting to give it all away. And I think it's a real testament to his character when you hear about some of the groups that he's already partnered with, and they're inspired by him to the point where they're saying, we will give money beyond our NIL compensation for him. We're going to donate more money to his foundation that he's setting up to help these very deserving and underserved children in foster care. So we've had lots of examples of this over the years, that NIL has been legal. And I think it's just another great example of what these young men and women are capable of doing when you give them the chance and let them put their name and their image to good use to help people who need it.
100%. We have someone else up here who'd like to talk. Hey, it's our friend Hob Buggins. What's going on, man? It's been a while.
What up? Anyway, I was just asking what are y'all's opinions of the talk around Byron Leftwich being interested in the offensive coordinator gig at Notre Dame.
Yeah, that caught my eye as well. I don't know, guys, did you get a chance to read about that? Because there's a name that, it's weird when you hear a name and you're like, wow, has it been that long since he played? Because I remember when he was lighting it up in the MAC. But what do you guys think of this? Byron Leftwich reaching out to Notre Dame about the offensive coordinator position last week per a source. He and Marcus Freeman have stayed in touch as he remains a serious candidate for a job. So, I think it would be great. What do you guys think about this?
To me, it's an odd fit, not necessarily because, he's quote unquote a bad coach or quote unquote a good coach or quote unquote a good fit. But I think it's always fascinating to see a guy who coordinates a Super Bowl as an offensive coordinator, is lauded, is supposed to be the next big NFL thing, and then very shortly afterwards is unceremoniously fired. To go through that kind of change, and especially to go through that quick of a fall from grace, is always very odd to see in coaching circles. But when I think of college Brian Leftwich, I immediately think of, the iconic drive of his lineman pulling him down the field and knowing that guy knows quarterbacks. He knows, at least how to make a story out of yourself. And if you go to somewhere like Notre Dame, that's the type of thing that you need to be able to sell to recruits. Now, whether he's going to be able to be good at evaluating film for high schoolers and being able to build scheme around them and work with making sure that you get recruits on campus all the time and convince them to go to there as opposed to an Ohio State, a Michigan, or somewhere else like that. It's a guy who hasn't had very much experience in college football outside of playing college football, but I'd be thoroughly interested to see what happens when you have a young, newish coach in Marcus Freeman taking kind of a gamble on a guy like Brian Leftwich, who very recently was a huge hot commodity in the NFL before dropping off and being fired this past year. I think it would be, if anything else, a very interesting hire as an outside party to watch.
Personally, I think that this whole thing is just Marcus Freeman trying to make sure that he never has to worry about losing to Marshall in the near future by hiring one of their most famous players. I mean, right? Like that's just kind of what it says to me is that, he's making sure that he's got his bases covered after after losing to Marshall 26-21 at home last year at the beginning of the season. So no, I think it'd be an interesting move. Um, I was a little surprised that Tommy Rees left Notre Dame to go to Bama, um, especially when we heard that Washington's offensive coordinator is going to stay there. They're going to run it back. Most of their skill players are returning. They got a lot of yardage returning for this season, and supposedly he wants to get a head coach job pretty soon. But Tommy Rees was lured away, and you kind of would think that if he sees a long term future at Notre Dame, he would have stuck around. So, Byron Leftwich, yeah, could be interesting. Coming from an NFL perspective, that's where all of his coaching experience has been so far. He's got a Super Bowl ring that he can wave around to recruits, and he's got that experience in the NFL both as a player and as a coach. So he knows what they're looking for at the next level. And obviously, Notre Dame's going to be able to walk into the room of almost any elite player in the country and at least get them to hear them out. So I could see what he would bring to the job. It'll be interesting to see what Notre Dame winds up doing, though.
I have so many good memories of him as a football player at Marshall because as unlike 90% of people, 99% of people, I am a very pure college football fan. And those legendary games he was in, those are where just incredible quarterback play in the MAC in that era. And the idea of him going there, I do wonder, I'd love to, if he takes a job and there's an opportunity to talk to him, I'd wonder if maybe after spending these years as a pro head coach, maybe he decided there is an opportunity, a nice reason to transition instead into the college ranks. Maybe if there's aspects of that, perhaps he missed. I'm not sure, but certainly, I mean, yeah, as offensive coordinator. So I do wonder, and Notre Dame, as you said, it's one of the elite programs. They can certainly pay, and they run themselves at a level that a lot of college football institutions don't. Certainly, they're a lot more of an elite program than Marshall is across the board. So it's an opportunity for that kind of halfway point, maybe in his head, like not quite the NFL gig, but also a very elite college gig where again, you get to recruit players, you get to find people, and it's a little bit different of a game than trying to put together an offense in the NFL. So I'm curious about that. I'd love someone to ask him if he takes that job, if he gets that job, what led him to make that move. What are your thoughts on this? We've been kind of blathering on. Oh, maybe I put him to sleep. JD, what are your thoughts? I saw you wanted to have a chat there.
Listen, I was just going to hop in to say, we were going down memory lane with Brian Leftwich and part of his career of leaving Marshall, becoming a top 10 pick. One of the things that I always love about his career is he ended up getting picked by the Jacksonville Jaguars solely because the Minnesota Vikings could not figure out how to get their draft pick in time. So they had to surrender all those picks. I think it was either 2 or 3 picks because their time kept expiring and they couldn't figure out how to get their draft card in for the actual pick. So they lost a pick to, I think it was Jacksonville and something like Carolina as well, simply because, at number 7, Minnesota was on the clock and just could not make a selection. So all these other teams started picking, and Jacksonville immediately jumped in and said, yep, Byron Leftwich, that's our guy, making him number 7 in the pick. I absolutely, when we look at the chaos of the NFL draft and things that can happen, I think Minnesota just having multiple expirations is still one of the funniest things that has ever happened in the NFL. And getting to talk about Brian Leftwich probably just unlocked that for the first time in 20 years for me on that.
Well, hey, as a Packers fan, I appreciate you bringing up that memory about the Vikings as well. So thank
you. Oh, boy. Well, this is our CFB Talk. We're kind of slowly running this down here with about 10 minutes left. There's a couple other topics that have been kind of around college football. Again, if you'd like to chime in and add your own, feel free to hit request. One of the other talks, it's so funny. I had Brian Leftwich's story kind of as part of it. One of the questions I thought was fun and just kind of a lighter scenario. Your school must merge with your in-state rival. What would you call yourselves, and what would be your nickname? The top comment, one of the ones I thought was very humorous, was by Florida State fan Honcho 5522. Obviously, Florida State and Florida. It seems to be where he's going with this. He said the combined team would be called the Florida Men, which I think is perfect. Florida Men, perfect. If there's thoughts you guys have, we'd love to hear them. But JD, serious, did you get a chance to see that post? If not, what two teams would you merge, and what kind of team would you create?
Yeah, I definitely saw the post, and one of the things that I immediately think of is what would make people the most angry, because I think a lot of people would immediately try to go with something along the lines of like a Texas Oklahoma or a Alabama uh, Auburn situation or something else like that. But the first thing that I immediately think of is something along the line of like the West Pittsburgh Panther Killers or something similar along the lines of that, to revive like these old rivalries that very rarely get to get played these days. I think something with Texas and Texas A&M would have been absolutely hilarious. Or you could even go with something like, you could reignite the Civil War up with Oregon and Oregon State and, call them the State of Oregon Platypuses or something similar to that. I would love to see something like that if we're going to play that exercise.
JD, I know that Texas is bigger than a lot of countries, but technically they do have to be in-state rivals in order to qualify for this question. So the West Pittsburgh whatevers aren't going to fit.
Pittsburgh's just Northwest Virginia. I'm sure everybody can agree to that.
I will say this. If you put Marshall and West Virginia put together, I don't know about the school, but that'd be a badass mascot with a mountaineer riding a buffalo or a bison, whatever.
Or listen, give me a centaur with a giant shotgun just at football games. I would love to see that.
A centaur with the shotgun is it should just be the name of the mascot. Like that. Gosh, it was originally a parody trailer, and then they turned it into a really funny B movie, but hobo with a shotgun. But that one may not be seen by as many people. But I like
the
that
Mountain
one.
State Minotaurs. Mountain State Minotaurs. Let's make
that.
Yeah. That's great.
Did you intentionally go for Minotaurs instead of Minotaurs because of the whole coal mining thing?
You said it. Yeah. The other one, I have to say, from the post, one of the other ones I liked was the University of Washington State University Sockeyes. Because the salmon, it's Washington. They have a lot of salmon. We cover the coast of the inland side of the state. But I have to say, people pointed out as much as people like the Seattle Kraken, the Sockeyes would have been a perfect name for a hockey team. Oh my goodness, that seemed to be a miss right there.
Oh, if we want to go completely off topic, are you aware of why they couldn't use Sockeyes as the name?
Frisbee team.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, essentially somebody else had already beaten them to the copyright. And one of the other funny ones that I had definitely seen was there was a adult romance novelist who had a series of like fictional hockey teams to put in her novels, and she used like 3 or 4 other names that the Seattle NHL franchise wanted to use. So they had a copyright war with her to try to secure any of these other additional names. But of course, the Frisbee team already had the Sockeyes, and then there were so many others that were already used up by this romance novelist who was trying to fight for all of these copyrights. It was kind of a similar thing when the Washington Commanders, before they were the Commanders and they were the football team and they were looking for another name, other people had just began to squat on those IPs. Very similar situation in Seattle. But yeah, the reason that they are not the Sockeyes, it's IP squatting. It's absolutely fantastic.
Oh my goodness. Another story,
the one that I liked was when they were trying to come up with a name and people were like throwing out, I think it should be this, I think it should be that. The folks over at R Hockey actually came up with the Seattle Rain City Bitch Pigeons.
That is actually a really funny logo. It's a beautiful logo and hilarious because it's a pigeon
fantastic.
In a raincoat.
They made apparel with it. I mean, it is It is an amazing creation, very creative, and the graphics were actually really well designed. Because
You
it's
could
this
tell you
angry-looking
could tell a
pigeon.
pro did that. You could tell a pro did that as like a fun like lark that they wanted to do because it is sharp.
Absolutely, like the smaller logo that they did. I mean, it's like a very angry-looking pigeon with like a nor'easter, or I guess I don't know, or nor'wester's a thing. Um, with the hat and the rain jacket and everything. I like there's pictures of people who've gotten there's hoodies and there's actually hockey sweaters and stuff with it on. Like it would have been a phenomenal one, obviously for various reasons, not acceptable for the NHL,
You
but
know,
it's fantastic.
one last topic I wanted to just touch on because this is something that has been something that we've wanted to see for anyone who's been involved with it. Is it sounds like the Liberty Bowl is going to get the money it takes to give it that renovation that it's desperately needed. With the state, because the state of Tennessee, the mayor of Memphis requested something like $350 million to cover renovations to both the Liberty Bowl and FedEx Forum. But as everyone who's ever covered a game in the Liberty Bowl will tell you, that stadium was in dire need of it. The press box was horrific. In addition to the problems, I mean, the Liberty Bowl this season, I mean, obviously Memphis was going through a much larger crisis without any running water. But the governor of the state has said that they are going to go ahead and give the full money that was requested for those two particular facilities. There was some other additional money requested for athletic facilities. So that means the Liberty Bowl could very well reach could be in line for that renovation that it has desperately needed, to the point where it's been, a problem not only for the Liberty Bowl, but that's Memphis's home stadium. Uh, and I just have to say that's something I wanted to note. I mean, I know, Sirius, you're from, Tennessee originally. What do you think about this with the Liberty Bowl?
I am honestly surprised that the governor was willing to do any kind of a favor for Memphis, given the politics that are involved. But it's great news because the Liberty Bowl is for the Southeast. I mean, like it's one of the older stadiums. It's got a lot of history there. A lot of SEC teams have played there over the years, including both of the two in-state teams in bowl games. So it's nice to see them actually set aside the funds to be willing to help out. I think they said it's going to be like $250 million for the Liberty Bowl, but very much needed. Hopefully it'll also kind of it's brought some light to some other issues that the city of Memphis has been facing, and hopefully they'll get some assistance there as well. Kind of reminds me of some of the attention that Jackson got placed on it this past season with Jackson State, kind of drawing eyeballs to the issues that were going on there, where sports maybe can hopefully help, kind of uplift the city at large and bring some attention and some good works to try to take care of some problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope that moves forward. I know it has to go through the legislature, even though the governor proposed it. But I know in the initial articles that came out from Memphis and from the Tennessee area, it sounds like that legislature is going to go ahead and blow that one through. I think it's an easy basket. Sports is always, one of those wonderful kind of. That's why we love it. It's something that can be bipartisan when both parties are kind of looking to kind of make an easy basket. And it sounds like that's something the Liberty Bowl Stadium, although it's kind of funkier name now. I mean, everyone knows that this Liberty Bowl. That is something we'd love to see renovated. And fans, media, because again, that press box needed it. That's something we hope to see, and hopefully they'll implement that soon. Well, you know what? It has been about an hour. We like to wrap these up around now. It's Tuesday night. We loved hearing your calls and talking what's going on in college football. We do these every Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. My name is Bob Ekhire. He was joined by my regular co-hosts, JD Moore and Sirius. Hope you all have a great rest of your week. Now I'm going to hang up and listen.